In 1527, an old Spanish ship left Havana looking for water and wood. The sailors were hungry and tired. They became very happy when they saw an island no one had ever recorded on a map, but ash was blowing in the wind. On the beach, they found huge footprints much wider than a normal man could make, and bones that had been cracked open to get the marrow out. Something was hiding in the trees, and it had already spotted them. I was 22 years old when we saw the island. Our navigator wrote it down as an empty space on the map between the routes we already knew. The sky was clear and the ocean was calm. We had left Havana carrying tools, gunpowder, and a chest of beads for trading. Captain Salazar wanted fresh water and wood. More than that, he wanted his name on a map that other people would read. He said the island would give him both. He stood on the upper deck with one hand on the rail and watched the coastline appear. At first it looked like a dark line. Then it grew into trees, rocks, and white waves. Our ship was an old vessel named Santa Marta. The sails had patches. The ropes worked fine if they stayed wet. The water barrels were almost empty. The salted pork tasted like tar from the barrels. We had been eating small meals for a week. I could feel my arms hurting when I pulled the ropes. Ruiz the bosun had a cough that sounded worse at night. Esteban, the navigator, watched the water depth carefully and the color of the ocean. He said the ocean floor got shallow fast near the island. He warned the captain to keep us away until we found a safe passage through. There were 10 of us on the ship. I worked as a sailor and did whatever else was needed. Hernan led the soldiers. He carried a long spear and always kept a gun near him. Friar Martin wore a rosary on his belt and had a look that could calm a man who woke from a nightmare. Ibarra the doctor kept herbs and knives in a leather case and hated the smell of the lower deck more than anyone on board. Diego was the youngest, a boy who ran messages and fed the chickens until we ate them. Vasco was our gunner and kept the gunpowder dry as if it were his own life. Thomas was from the Canary Islands and spoke several languages from the old trade routes. He was good at learning strange words and skilled in a boat. We stayed away from the island and watched it through the telescope. A reef ran like a long pale scar around the north side. The south side had a gap where water flowed dark and steady. Smoke rose from the middle of the island. It did not rise in a thin line like a cooking fire, but in a wide cloud that drifted low and slow. The air smelled faintly of fat and salt even from that far away. The captain ordered the anchor dropped in 30 fathoms of water. He sent me with Esteban and Ruiz in the longboat to measure the depth of the channel. We pulled hard on the oars as we moved along the reef. The water was clear near the shallow parts and then went dark. A current tried to turn our bow. Esteban called out depths as he lowered the weighted rope and pulled it up with grains of sand and broken shells stuck to the wax. We went around a small point and saw a clear lane into a cove. The beach was pale sand. A line of palm trees stood back from the water. Behind them, thicker trees rose and hid whatever was farther inland. No huts showed, no canoes, no people along the shore, only that low smoke farther back. We returned to the Santa Marta and reported what we saw. The captain listened and gave orders for a landing at dawn. He wanted 2 boats with 6 men in each, plus Diego to carry extra ammunition and gunpowder. We would take tools to cut wood and barrels to fill with fresh water. Vasco loaded 2 small cannons into the boats and covered them with tarps. Hernan picked 4 men who could carry spears without tripping on roots. He gave me a short sword and a small shield and told me to keep them close. We slept in our clothes. The waves lifted the hull in a slow rhythm that my body knew by now. I lay awake and listened to the ship's small sounds. Ropes rubbing against pulleys. A spoon in a cup. The quiet breathing of men who had run out of words for the day. I thought of the smoke and the flat beach, and the way birds had turned in a tight circle over the trees, and then vanished all at once. I told myself it was nothing. I did not sleep much. At first light we lowered the boats. The water was smooth inside the reef, and the shore looked close. We rowed without talking except for counting. Sand scraped under the bottom, and we pulled the boats up the beach. Hernan jumped out first with a spear and stood guard while we unloaded barrels and tools. Ibarra and I carried the doctor's bag and a shovel. The air on land was still and heavy. The smell of fat was stronger. It did not come from the boats or the men. We walked past the palm trees and looked for a stream. The sand changed to soil covered with fallen leaves. Our boots sank slightly and left clear prints. We found tracks that were not ours, At first I thought they were prints of a large man who went barefoot. Then I saw the spacing. One step to the next was longer than I could make if I ran. The heel dug deep from heavy weight. The toes spread wide and pressed into the ground like broad paddles. Ruiz knelt over one and set his palm inside. His fingers did not touch both edges. Some animal, he said without confidence. No claw, Thomas said. 4 toes only, human. Hernan said to keep moving. He did not look at the track again. We found water an hour later. A stream ran down from higher ground and cut a narrow channel to the sea. The water tasted clean. We heard nothing but the flowing water and the sound of insects. We set men to fill the barrels. Ruiz and Vasco cut a straight tree for a new beam and trimmed the branches in a neat pile. The friar walked along the bank and looked at the plants. He said they were ones he had seen on other islands, though thicker and taller here. I asked why the birds were silent. He had no answer. We followed the stream a little way inland to see if the flow stayed steady. On a bend we found a pile of bones. They were not buried. They were stacked. The pile had long bones, ribs, and skulls. The skulls were split down the center. The long bones were cracked open. The splits looked fresh. Grease from the marrow stained the soil. A smell of smoke clung to the place, though no fire burned there now. Ibarra crouched over a thigh bone and spoke in a low voice. "These are human," he said. "Men and women." The skulls are small and large, both. The cuts are made with stone or dull iron, not clean, but they knew where to strike. The friar crossed himself and then steadied his hand. Hernan looked at the trees and at the open ground and said to return to the boats. The captain needed to see this. No one argued. We backed away and kept our eyes on the brush. On the beach, we found our landing area changed. Something had moved through the camp we had made. The barrels were still there and the cannons lay covered, untouched. But a bundle of oars was scattered, and one was snapped across a rock. A palm shelter that Diego had built over the gunpowder was crushed flat. The sand showed tracks like the ones we had seen by the stream. They walked from the edge of the trees to the boats, around the barrels and back to the trees. One print stopped close to the front of our longboat and turned as if the thing had stood to look inside. Vasco lifted the tarp from a cannon and checked the firing hole. He made a small sound when he saw that the firing tool was gone, as if a hand had pulled it free. I found it near the fire pit. It lay next to a rope we had cut the day before. The rope had been tied into a knot I did not know. The knot held tight. Hernan called us into a circle. His jaw worked once and then he spoke in a steady voice. "We do not split up," he said. "We keep distance between the trees and us. We move the barrels to the boats and get them on board. The captain will move closer and bring men and horses if there is a way through the reef. Until then, no one wanders. Diego, stay next to Tomas. If anything moves from the brush, shout." We carried until our backs burned. The sun climbed and made the air press against us. The only sound beyond our own work was the small hiss of foam on the sand and the trickle of the stream. When the barrels were on board, we loaded the cut wood. I took the last run with a bundle of poles on my shoulder. At the water's edge, I stopped. The sand under my feet shook once. It was not the sea. It came from inland. A tree bent and rose again. Another did the same a little farther on. Then the brush settled. We pushed off and rowed hard to the Santa Marta with the first load. On deck, we told the captain what we had seen. He called Esteban to the rail and studied the cove. He spoke without taking his eyes from the shore. "We move in as far as we can," he said. "We will not leave good water and wood because of tracks. Men make tracks. Men can be dealt with." The anchor came up. We moved into the channel with the current, using just enough sail to hold our line. The reef showed its sharp edges on both sides, and the hull shook when the swells lifted. Esteban called out depths. The captain held the steering handle, as if he would pull the island toward us by force. We dropped anchor about 600 feet from the beach. I could see the broken oar from the deck now. The knot in the rope looked like a small fist in the sun. We finished the second load near noon. The beach looked the same as before. The tracks were fresh again over hours. A new set crossed the stream where we had not crossed. In the soft mud by the bank, we saw the print of a knee and a hand next to it. The hand covered my whole forearm from wrist to elbow. Ibarra noticed that the skin had left a faint trace of ash in the mud. The friar said to be careful what we touched. He said we walked among things we did not understand. We worked faster. Hernan kept 2 men with spears facing the trees. Vasco prepared a cannon on shore and pointed it toward the brush. He set a slow burning cord and told Diego to watch the glowing end. Ruiz and I dragged a fallen tree trunk toward the boats. My boots dug into wet sand. The trunk moved inch by inch. I counted my breaths and put my back into it. The sand shook again. It happened 3 times in a slow count. The birds returned in a wild cloud and then flew away over the water. The brush opened once and closed. I saw nothing clear, only a dark shape, then leaves. We stood in a half circle and raised our weapons. No one spoke. The air smelled of fat again, stronger than before, and something sour that stung the nose. I lifted the trunk with Ruiz and we made the last steps to the boat. We pushed off without waiting for orders. As the bottom slid into water, the sand behind us showed new prints. They appeared as the water pulled back and filled as it came forward. The steps were long. The weight was heavy. I felt my hands shake when I set the oars. On the way to the ship, I looked back at the line of trees. For a moment I thought I saw a face in the leaves. Not a mask, not paint, just a pale shape between branches at the height of 2 men. The leaves moved and then went still. I told no one. I knew what I had seen might be my own fear. I kept rowing and counted strokes and tried to keep my breathing even. The island did not feel empty. It felt awake and watching us. I did not like that thought, but it stayed. We ate on deck and kept our gear close. The captain ordered 2 more trips to the cove before dark. He moved a chest of beads and iron nails to the upper deck. He wanted to test whether gifts at the tree line would bring anyone out. Hernan asked permission to place a marker on the beach that would warn others away. The captain allowed it. He liked the show of strength. On the 3rd trip to shore, we found a structure we had not noticed. It stood beyond the palms in a patch of hard ground, half hidden by vines. It was a frame of thick wood tied together with plant fiber, taller than a man by a head. Skulls hung from the crosspieces by cords. They had been scraped clean. In the center, a pole held a belt of ribs and a length of woven hair. A round stone sat beneath as if used for breaking bone. The cords were worn smooth by handling. Flies gathered at the base where grease had dried in the soil. Thomas crouched to study the knots. "This knot is from no place I know," he said. "It locks when pulled and leaves a small loop. Whoever tied it has done it many times." We stood back from the frame. The air was still. Ibarra spoke half to himself. "These are trophies," he said. "The frame is a marker, not a grave." Hernan spat in the dirt and set his boot on the stone. "Let them see we are not frightened," he said, and flipped a skull from its cord with the tip of his spear. It rolled once and settled. The friar told him to stop. Hernan turned away with a short laugh that did not reach his eyes. We returned to the beach with the last of the wood and a net full of shellfish we had gathered at the rocks near the stream. The sand near the boats showed a new sign. A fish, the length of a man, lay opened with its insides removed cleanly. The head had been twisted off and placed beside the body. A small branch of leaves rested on the side. The skin showed cuts made in a pattern that ran from tail to belly. Our knives could not make such clean lines on that tough hide. The branch had a smell that made my tongue feel numb. "An offering," Thomas said. "Or a warning," Vasco said. We pushed off without debate and climbed aboard the Santa Marta before the light fell. The captain tied both boats to the back of the ship and aimed a small cannon toward the channel. He ordered a slow sweep along the shore to test the wind in the cove and then brought us back to the anchor. As the sun went low, he told Hernan to take 4 men and plant a pole with a board that marked our claim and passage. Hernan chose me, Ruiz, Diego, and Thomas. We loaded the board, a hammer, nails, a small barrel of gunpowder, and the chest of beads. On the beach, Hernan set the board at the high water line. He carved a cross above the letters and hammered the nails with firm strokes. Thomas placed beads at the base in a careful circle. The barrel of gunpowder went next to the beads with a string tied to the plug, running back under the sand to where Ruiz held the end. If the line moved, he would pull the plug and let the powder spill into wet sand. Hernan thought it a clever trick. He smiled once at how neat it was. We stepped back to the longboat and waited with oars ready. The trees were a wall of shadow. The frame with skulls stood darker than the trunks. No sound came but the wash on the sand. Diego kept looking at the line in the sand where the string ran. He held his breath as if the powder might hear him. I watched the edge of the trees and counted to 50 and back. Something moved at the frame. A shape larger than a man stood just behind it. The skulls shifted once as if a hand had brushed them. The shape leaned out and then back. I felt sweat on my palm and shifted my grip on the oar. Thomas raised a hand to keep us still. He lifted the chest of beads and set it on the sand halfway between us and the tree line. He stepped back with his palms open. "We come to trade," he said in clear, slow words, one after another, using greeting phrases from islands he knew. He repeated them and then fell silent. The shape did not move forward. A low sound came from the trees. Not a word, not a growl. Something that carried through the leaves and seemed to ask what we were. Another sound answered it from farther left. "There is more than one," Diego whispered. Ruiz set his hand on Diego's shoulder and pressed down. "Hold," he said. A long arm reached from behind the frame. The skin was pale and had streaks of ash. The hand closed over the top of the frame and lifted it as if it weighed nothing. The shape moved with the frame in one motion and set it aside. The skulls clicked against each other. Then the shape came out. The man was taller than any I had seen, with broad shoulders and a wide chest. The hair on his head hung in a matted rope. Scar lines crossed his arms. His lower jaw seemed larger than his forehead, and his teeth showed when he breathed through his mouth. He wore a skirt made from woven plant fiber and a belt strung with small bones. His forearms were wrapped with strips of hide. In his right hand he held a club made from a tree root with knots like stones. He looked at us without any hurry. Another stepped beside him. This one carried a spear of black wood with a sharpened bone tip. A third stood behind, a head taller still with a large belly that pushed against his belt. The third sniffed the air and then looked at the beads. He squatted with the stiffness of a man used to his own weight. He picked up a bead and rolled it between thumb and finger. He put it in his mouth and bit down. He spat it out and wiped his lip. He spoke a short word to the first. The first nodded once. Tomas tried again. He named objects and touched them. He said water, food, iron, wood, cloth in different languages. The first giant listened without moving. Then he pointed at the gunpowder barrel. He tapped his chest and then pointed at the trees. He made a scooping gesture, as if taking something that should be his. Hernan shook his head and drew a line across his chest with his hand. He pointed at the board with the cross and at the ship. The first giant watched the movement and then looked back at the barrel. He stepped forward once. Ruiz pulled the string. The plug came free and powder spilled. The first giant stopped short and tilted his head. He crouched and dipped a finger in the powder and brought it to his tongue. He spat and made a face. The second giant laughed, a low, short sound. The third sniffed again and stretched his arms like a man waking. Hernan raised his spear and spoke in a sharp tone. "Back," he said. He kept his eyes on the club. The first giant looked at the bead chest and then at the longboat. He stepped sideways, not closer, not farther, just changing his angle. The second shifted to match. The third stood still. I felt the breath leave my chest in a slow stream. I thought of the frame and the skulls and the pattern cut into the fish. I also thought of the water we needed and the wood we had. I did not want to shoot or run. The sky had gone the color that comes before night. The ship's lanterns were not yet lit. The air had no wind to carry a shout. Thomas took a strip of iron nails from his bag and held them high. He set them on the sand and stepped back again. The first giant's eyes went to the metal. He moved with more purpose now. He walked to the nails and knelt. He sniffed, touched, and then lifted them. He held them to his belt as if measuring where they would go. He stood to full height and looked at Thomas. "Friend," Thomas said, tapping his chest. "Friend." He pointed to himself, then to the giant, then to the ship, then to the stream. He made a lifting motion with both hands, as if to show working together. The giant did not repeat the word. He touched his chest with 3 heavy taps and spoke a name that sounded like a stone hitting wood. He pointed at the second and the third and spoke 2 more names that had the same weight. Then he pointed to the forest and said a longer word that sounded like a place. He turned and gave the club to the second. He held the nails against his belt and walked backward 2 steps, then turned and went into the trees without hurrying. The second and third followed after a pause. The frame remained on the ground. The beads lay scattered by their feet. The gunpowder barrel leaked a dark patch into the sand. A sound came from the other side of the clearing. A branch bent and rose. The men lifted weapons without orders. A sound came from the other side of the clearing. A branch bent and rose. The men lifted weapons without orders. Hernan's voice carried low and hard. "Form up," he said. "No one runs. If they charge, spears first. Guns fire on my mark. Aim at legs." I swallowed and rolled my shoulders once to ease the tightness. Eyes told myself to watch for the first shift in the leaves. I wanted to see it a moment before the others. I wanted to be useful. We waited until the brush closed behind them. Hernan did not lower his spear until the last leaf stopped moving. He spoke in a low voice. "Back to the ship," he said. "No trophies. Leave the chest." We told the captain what had happened. He listened without moving, and then called for lanterns on both sides and the back of the ship. He ordered the slow-burning cord lit at both cannons and had a bow strung with a quiver of arrows ready near the rail. Vasco loaded a double charge in one cannon and checked the vent 3 times. The captain told Esteban to write down the time and the tide. He wanted to know how the current changed at dusk in the channel. He had us run extra lines to the anchor to steady the front. Night in the cove was thick. The island did not show a single light inland. No fires burned on the beach. The water lay flat except for small ripples where fish moved. We ate in turns, and the captain walked the deck and stopped often to listen. The friar spoke softly with Diego and gave him a small wooden cross that he had carved on other trips for boys who had not seen home in a while. Diego closed his hand over it and nodded. Near midnight, a sound came from the reef. Stones knocking. Then a splash like a body dropping from a height. The hull trembled, not from a wave, from contact. Vasco ran to the side with a lantern. A dark shape slid along the planks and vanished toward the back. Another hit the rudder, and the steering handle jumped in its holder. Esteban swore under his breath and threw his weight on it. We heard breathing close to the waterline, not through the nose, through the mouth, slow and steady. A hand rose on the right side, fingers spread, and tested the hull as if it were a tree. "Stand ready," the captain said. "Do not fire unless I say." A head rose briefly into the light. Wet hair stuck to a wide forehead. Eyes reflected the lantern glow without color. The head sank back with no splash. Then a rope went loose and tugged. A mooring line at the front dipped toward the water, as if something pulled it hand over hand. The knot jerked and held. The pull stopped and then started again. The line creaked. "Cut it," Hernan said. "Wait," the captain said. The pull stopped again. A low voice spoke from the water, in the same word we had heard earlier. Another answered from the other side. The sound was not angry. It was plain, like a man who asked for a tool. They let go. The line lifted free of strain. The breathing faded. We waited with weapons ready. After a long time, Esteban eased the steering handle to center again. The captain told us to keep lanterns high and change the watch every hour with 2 men on each side and 1 at the back. Before dawn, the smell reached us. It blew from land when the air shifted. It came like a cloth waved in front of the face. Burned fat, cooked meat, a sweetness under it that turned the stomach. We stood downwind and said nothing. I thought of the bones by the stream and of the heads on cords, and I knew what the smell meant without needing Ibarra's words. Then a second smell came, a charred scent like tree sap. Vasco lifted his head. "Pitch," he said. "They are sealing something." At first light, the beach showed new marks. Our board with the cross had been moved. It now leaned against the gunpowder barrel. The chest of beads was open and empty. In its place sat the frame of skulls set between the board and the barrel, as if the 3 were now one sign. A long pole had been planted beside them. At its top hung a fresh scalp with hair dark and long. The hair was matted with oil. The scalp was not from one of us. It was too long for any of our men. The captain looked through the telescope and then handed it to me. The pole and the frame stood still. No people showed in the tree line. The stream ran as before. The sand around the pole was stamped with new prints overlapping in a mess. "We will not be toyed with," the captain said. He turned to Hernan. "We go inland today. We find their camp. We show them we are not prey." Tomas asked to try one more exchange first. They came to the line, he said. They took nails. They did not break the boats. We can give them iron for wood and water. We can leave without spilling blood. Hernan shook his head. They tasted the ship, he said. They tested our ropes. Next they test our throats. The friar looked at the beach and then at the men. If we go inland, we go with care, he said. We take what we need for one day and do not chase shadows. We keep a clear path back to the boats. The captain nodded once. 14 men to shore, he said. 2 cannons, gunpowder for the match, water skins, food for the day. We cut trail marks every 20 steps. Esteban keeps the ship ready to pull anchor if the wind turns. I checked my sword edge and found a small chip that I smoothed with a little stone. I ate a piece of bread and drank a cup of water and felt it sit heavy. I told myself to keep my steps light and my eyes open. We lowered the boats again. The men climbed in with gear balanced across their knees. The morning sun gave little warmth. The island waited without sound. I did not like that silence. I reminded myself that I had felt the same once on a different shore and had walked away again. It helped a little. We ran the boats up the sand and set the cannons on their low stands. Vasco chose a spot with a clear shot into the gap between 2 large trees. He loaded both and laid slow-burning cord. Hernan placed men in a column with spears forward, guns in the second row and swords behind. He told me to stay on the right of the column as scout and to mark the bark at eye level with my knife. Tomas would listen and watch for any sign of language or signal. Ibarra would take anything useful he found for understanding what we faced. The friar would keep eyes on the men's minds and not on the trees. We passed the frame and the pole without touching them. The scalp hung still. Flies moved on it in a quick cluster. We entered the trees and the light changed. The trunks rose straight and high and vines hung in curtains. The ground was uneven with roots and old stumps. The air had a wet weight. We moved in a steady rhythm. Every few steps I nicked the bark with the same small cut so we could see our way back. 10 minutes in, we found a path beaten into the undergrowth. It was not an animal trail. The width fit 4 men side by side. At the edges, broken twigs showed where something large brushed by often. The path carried a faint sour smell. We moved onto it with the spears tight to the front. I heard a thud to our left, then quiet. Another sounded to the right, farther off. Hernan raised a hand and we stopped. He pointed with 2 fingers, and the gunmen lifted their weapons to that side. We waited and heard nothing else. The path climbed and then leveled. We came to a clearing. In it stood 3 racks woven from heavy branches and set low to the ground. On the racks lay cuts of meat, drying over small smoky embers covered with damp leaves. At the far side of the clearing, a pit had been dug and lined with stones. Heat rose from it. A round rock with a dark stain sat near the pit, larger than the one by the frame. On a line strung between 2 posts hung lengths of stringy meat and strips of skin. A jawbone with teeth still in it had been tied to the post as if to keep it from curling as it dried. No one spoke. I felt my mouth go dry. Diego stared and gripped his knife until his knuckles went white. Vasco stepped to the pit and held his hand over it. They roasted a body here not long ago, he said. The stones still hold heat. Ibarra knelt by the racks and studied the cuts without touching them. He spoke in a flat voice. Human thigh, shoulder, rib meat. They take the fat and the muscles. They know how to dry it. Thomas walked to the edge of the clearing and pointed at a set of footprints. A child, he said. Small steps, bare feet. They are not only men here. The brush ahead of us moved again. Not wide, just a steady parting as if a heavy body slid through with patience. A shadow filled the gap. Then a face showed, different from the one on the beach. This one had scars that ran from ear to jaw in a ladder pattern. The eyes had a dead calm. He took 1 step into the clearing and stopped. He looked at our line and then at the racks. He made a short sound behind him. More shapes gathered in the leaves. The man with the scarred face stood still, his weight even on both legs, his chest wide and bare. Behind him, 5 more figures stepped from the brush, one at a time. They carried clubs, spears, and one carried a bow strung with gut and a bundle of arrows tied with grass. Their height made our spears look short. The smell of smoke and grease clung to their skin. One had a necklace of finger bones that clicked when he moved. Another had a strip of torn and stained cloth tied around his head like a band. They did not rush. They spread out along the edge of the clearing, silent but for the slow crack of branches under their feet. The scarred one lifted a hand. The others stayed in place. He pointed with 2 fingers at the racks and then at us. His voice was deep and carried without force. He said a word once, then again. Thomas strained to catch it, moving his mouth with the sound. He said it under his breath. He says, "Eat or food." He points at us. He points at the racks. Hernan raised his spear and spoke back in Spanish. "We are not meat," he said. "We are not yours." His tone was strong, but his jaw worked. The scarred one looked at the racks again, and then made the same gesture toward us. He tapped his own belly and grinned, teeth long and wide. He said the word a 3rd time, louder. Behind him, one of the giants chuckled and spat to the side. The bowman put an arrow on the string and let it hang. The others shifted their weight. The ground under us felt narrow. My hand ached around the sword grip. Vasco whispered through his teeth, "If they get close, shoot. The ball will break bone at this range." Hernan's voice came steady. "Not yet." He moved his spear to the line of the scarred one's chest. "Hold until they break the distance." The friar stepped forward half a step, his hand raised. He spoke in calm Latin, the blessing for peace and for protection. The words rolled low and even, not fast, not weak. The giants watched him. The scarred one tilted his head as if listening to a story he had not heard before. For a moment the others did not move. Then one with the necklace of finger bones leaned forward and spoke a long string of words. He slapped his stomach and barked a laugh. He pointed his club at Diego, who had gone pale and stiff as a board. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. The air pressed heavy on my chest. I wanted to strike or run, but my legs held where they were. I thought of the ship waiting in the cove. The lanterns lit, the sails tied up. The way back was a path through trees that could close at any step. We could not stand here forever. Thomas took a slow step forward. He held out an iron knife flat on his palm. He said the word he thought meant food, then added water, iron, friend, all in different languages he had used before. He pointed at the knife, then at the racks, then back to us. His voice shook once and steadied. "Trade," he said. "Trade." The scarred one looked at the knife. His eyes narrowed. He said something to the bowman, who lowered the arrow and let the string go loose. The scarred one stepped forward 2 steps, close enough that I could see the seams of scars under his ribs. He held out his hand. His fingers were thick as branches, nails cracked. Thomas laid the knife across his palm. The giant closed his hand around it and tested the edge against his thumb. Blood appeared where it touched. He looked at the drop without blinking, then licked it. His tongue came away red. He spoke a short command. The others moved back a step. He turned the knife in his hand and then pointed with it toward the path behind us, the one we had cut in from the beach. He said a word that sounded like go. He repeated it with more force, pointing again. Then he lifted the knife as if to show he was keeping it. His grin widened. He tapped the blade to his chest, then pointed at us, then again at the path. "Go," Hernan's jaw clenched. "He sends us out," he said. His knuckles went white on the spear, but he lowered it slowly, the tip dipping until it touched earth. He spat once to the side, never taking his eyes from the scarred one. "We take the order this time." We backed toward the path. The giants did not follow, though their eyes never left us. The bowman stayed with the arrow ready but low. The scarred one watched every step. When the last of us reached the path, he raised the knife high and barked a single word. The others answered with deep voices all at once, like a wall of sound. It carried into the trees and bounced back at us. My chest shook with it. Then they fell silent again. We moved fast along the path we had marked. My knife cuts shone pale in the dim light, easy to follow. I kept looking behind. The brush closed behind us, empty. No sound but our boots and our breaths. When we reached the beach, the cannons stood where we had left them, untouched. The pole with the scalp still leaned near the board. The flies had grown thicker. The boats looked smaller than I remembered. We pulled them into the water without pause. On the ship, the captain heard our words and stood still for a long time. Then he said, "They own the island. We cannot break them with the men we have. We have water. We have wood. We will not stay for glory. We mark it as cursed ground and leave." His tone left no space for reply. That night we lay at anchor one last time. No shapes moved in the water, no ropes pulled. But in the distance inland we saw a glow against the sky. A fire burned high. The smell of fat carried again across the water. Men shifted in their sleep, and turned on their blankets. I lay awake and listened to the faint sound of voices from shore, deep and steady, like men singing to keep rhythm. The sound carried far. It did not break until dawn. We raised anchor with the first light and let the tide carry us through the channel. The reef broke white on both sides. The island slipped behind us. I watched until the line of trees blurred into sky. My arms ached with the pull of ropes, but I kept looking back. I thought of the knife in the scarred one's hand, the way he held it as if it belonged to him from the start. I thought of the racks, the pits, the skulls on cords. I knew I would never set foot on that shore again, but I also knew others would.